Welcome to the Northern California Water Association annual meeting and our Headwaters and Forest Health panel. I've been in this game a long time, and back in the 90s, we talked about forest health and thought, wow, it really was hard to get through. And I think now, here we are in 2021, and forest health is at the top of the minds of many people. Today, we've got 4 people who really helped put it there as we're going forward. And so this morning we have Henry McCann from the PPIC. He's a research analyst for 6 years. We have Jay Ziegler with the TNC, the Nature Conservancy. He's been there a decade. Eddie Fecco from Placer County Water Agency, who's the old timer on the job at 15 years. And Willie Whittlesey, the newcomer at 4 years. So I'm going to do their presentations. We'll have some questions in the end. Thrilled having this panel. These are truly the people who are the movers and shakers in headwaters and forest health management in our state. So Henry, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Henry McCann. I'm a research associate with the Public Policy Institute of California. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit public policy research organization, and the Water Policy Center focuses on the state's most pressing water management and policy challenges. I'm going to help get this conversation started today by presenting a high-level overview of headwater forest management issues based on our more in-depth work that we've been putting together over the past couple of years. The Sierra Cascade Headwater Forests are 5.5 million acres of mixed conifer forest on the west slope of the Sierra Nevada and Southern Cascade Ranges, roughly between 2,000 and 6,000 feet in elevation. The map on the left marks this area in gold, and the forests are indicated in green. 2/3 of these forests are federally owned, indicated by the dark green color, and the remainder are private and other non-federal public forest lands. As this group knows, the region is critically important to the state's water grid, as around half of the state's surface water supplies originate in these mountains. In addition to water supply, the infrastructure in this region supports hydropower production, flood control, tourism and recreation, and aquatic ecosystems. The region also has very high wildfire risk and vulnerability to droughts and pests. This is in large part due to the fact that California's headwater forests have become more dense and simplified compared to their pre-European conditions. This change was in large part driven by the prohibition of frequent burning by indigenous communities, early timber harvest practices, and aggressive fire suppression. We're living with the consequences of these changes today in terms of more large, severe wildfires and susceptibility to widespread tree die-off during droughts. The overall goal of managing these forests today is to create more variation in terms of tree densities, openings, and tree sizes, which improves overall forest health. The management techniques that we can use to get there fit into 2 broad categories. On one hand, we have strategic use of fire, which includes the intentional setting of controlled fires, we call that prescribed burning, or managed natural ignitions, for example, lightning strikes, for resource benefits. We call that managed wildfire. On the mechanical side, we're referring to the use of mechanized equipment to remove live and dead fuels from forests, and this includes both mechanical thinning and, to a certain extent, timber harvest. We recently conducted some high-level accounting for how these techniques have been used in the region over the past decade. And the major takeaway from this work is that forest management is not scaling up fast enough to meet forest health goals. Experts suggest that reducing the spread of severe wildfire requires strategically treating and maintaining approximately 20 to 30% of forests in the landscape. By our accounting, forest managers have treated around 16% of forests over the past decade. But this overall trend masks some notable differences. For example, management on private forests is almost 3 times the rate of management on federal lands. There are also differences across the region, as only 8 in 24 watersheds have reached this target. Improving forest health can help protect water quality from post-fire erosion. So as heavy rains following large severe wildfires can rapidly wash sediment and debris into streams. And this can damage and impair water infrastructure and hydroelectric power generation equipment. It can also harm aquatic ecosystems. But post-fire erosion impacts can be uneven across a watershed. So to a certain extent, the large foothill reservoirs are somewhat buffered from post-fire erosion by smaller upstream reservoirs that capture sediment and debris. Large downstream reservoirs may also have more room to accommodate sediment and debris compared to smaller reservoirs, which can be easily overwhelmed by sediment. Every tributary has different levels of post-fire erosion risks and vulnerable assets. Another potential benefit of bringing forests back to health is augmenting water supplies. So preliminary research tells us that forest thinning reduces water demanded by trees on the landscape. This can increase runoff in wetter headwater tributaries. There's also some research indicating that thinning forests may actually improve snowpack accumulation and delay snowpack melting compared to dense closed canopy forests. Now, as forest vegetation grows back over time, lacking regular maintenance, it'll diminish these benefits to stream flows and snowpacks over time. So vegetation conditions must be maintained over time to maintain these benefits, theoretically. Also, in general, more research is needed on the duration and magnitude of this benefit in order to generalize at larger scales. There are several challenges to improving forest health, and I want to name some of the highest priority challenges from my perspective. The first is that there's a history of boom and bust cycles in public funding sources, namely state and federal funding sources, that doesn't align well with long-term forest stewardship needs, which may take a decade to bring back to health and even longer to maintain. So there's a real need to strengthen the portfolio of funding sources, including wood utilization and ecosystem services markets. There's also not enough infrastructure on the ground to support the workload. So there's a need for more sawmills, biomass utilization facilities, cross-laminated timber plants to support a supply chain for woody biomass. And this will help offset the cost of management, to create economic incentives to pull fuels off of forests, and potentially create opportunities for rural economic development. Large forest management efforts happening up in the headwaters today are also finding it difficult to find the staff and personnel that they need for their forest health projects. So on one hand, that means there's a need for more planners and ecologists, but also on the other hand, there's a need for more folks on the ground with drip torches and chainsaws in order to get the job done. Finally, there's a need to navigate across a complex ownership patchwork, including a large dose of federal lands, while working through these aforementioned challenges. And this requires really strong coordination and alignment within partnerships. Finally, important pieces of the puzzle are coming together this year. And this illustrates how policy and partnership efforts are accelerating in the right direction. At the federal level, the Forest Service recently formalized their commitment to ramping up management efforts in a collaborative way. The state also committed to increasing their forest management work. And a few weeks ago, the California Forest Management Task Force published the state's first action plan for improving forest health on all lands. Complementing this plan is the governor's wildfire resilient spending package, which includes proposals for increasing state funding for forest health and extending the funding timeline on cap and trade dollars that support forest health projects. At the same time, there's also a growing link between water utilities and headwater forest management work. These utilities are working within the headwaters as integrators within their watersheds. They're working as advocates and project champions for forest health issues. And in some cases, they're also funding part of the forest stewardship work. So I hope to further explore this throughout the panel. And with that, I'll say thanks very much for your time.
Henry, I think you really teed this up nicely. And Brent, I just want to take a moment to thank you and all the NCWA leaders for the incredible work that you do in balancing meeting the water needs for people and agriculture, as well as integrating nature as part of that package. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all virtually today. It'd be a lot nicer to be in person and roll up our sleeves together on all of this, but I really do welcome this opportunity to join this distinguished panel and really try to find a new path forward here in how we're integrating headwaters management with water management in California. And I'd like to turn to my presentation here, if I might. I'd like to just take a moment to talk about forests and why this work is so important. Our forests are our carbon sink in California. 30% of the carbon that we sequester, the equivalent of 200 million passenger cars on the road a year, is provided in our California forests. As you all know, it is also the source of 60% of California's developed water supply. It is close to an $8 billion travel and recreation industry, supporting 55,000 jobs in areas of California that really have not had the strong recovery that urban California has enjoyed. And fundamentally, the reason the Nature Conservancy is in this is these fires are not like fires that used to burn in our forest. Our fires today are mega fires. They consume 100,000, 200,000 acres at a time. In this past year, we experienced our first 1 million acre fire in California. And these fires destroy watershed values. They destroy wildlife and habitat values. They fundamentally alter soil types and regeneration for wildlife and freshwater habitat values across these areas that are burned. To just give you a picture of how dramatic these fire challenges have become, you can see that scope of the 4.3 million acre fires that burned in the redded zones in this graph in 2020. And so that's a 1 year capsule of what wildfires did in California last year. Then let's just look at the 20 years before. Those are the brown shaded areas, and thinking about the areas, again, like 1 year, 20 years, and 60 years here in the gray. And so you can see the urgency and of this challenge and the magnitude that these wildfires are burning at in terms of destroyed forests, and what that means for all of us. And fundamentally, I think we all need to know, and we've learned this, and as you all know, the Nature Conservancy is a science-based organization. We don't jump into these decisions. We really work with partners, stakeholders, university academic scientists, PPIC, and others to really better understand what's happening on the landscape. And the truth is, because of the way industrial forest land was managed in the first half, well, really in the 18th century, most of the 19th century, even-aged cuts created a regeneration where our forests were even-aged rather than dispersed growth and multi-generational growth and a more complex forest environment that we all think of when we think about forests on the landscape. What I mean by that is you have this sort of fire suppressed area, the slide on the left, where you can see sort of all the trees the same size, they're overly dense, they're more subject to disease. That's why we have 150 million dead and dying trees in California. And then when you introduce fire, when you introduce selective cutting in an ecologically smart way, you wind up with a forest that is much more diverse, much greater spacing in the forest canopy, and diverse elevations across the forest. So you can really see just exactly the challenges that we're talking about there. And let me kind of share a little bit about how we came to this work in the Central Sierra as really being critical. I mean, we had a really robust communication with Placer County Water Agency in the wake of the King Fire. What can we do differently? What can we do differently that's good for those in Andy's agency to have more reliable, safe, clean drinking water supplies? What can we do that's better on the map? What can we do to avoid the next King Fire across the areas that we were managing? And so we as an organization looked at places where we got relationships, where we have done work on the ground. Independence Lake Preserve is a good example of that. That is a 2,800 acre preserve that I'd like to bring you all to as soon as we can do that. It's just in a place of unprecedented beauty. really we did a lot of active fire work together with the University of California and other partners up there. So you see, so we started Independent Lake, that's 2.3 thousand acres. Then with the help of Placer County Water Agency, we've embarked on the French Meadows project. Then now with Brent and the North Yuba Water Agency, we're taking that to 275,000 acres. If you think back on the slide I just showed you in the Central Sierra, working together with the Tahoe Conservancy, the Forest Service, the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, Placer County Water Agency, CAL FIRE, other partners, we're taking that region in a multi-watershed basis to 2.4 million acres. And where we'd like to get to in California is really thinking about the next decade of treating 1 million acres a year in forest lands and scaling up this work. And this is what it looks like. This is where we started. This is from French Meadows work. This is the overly dense forest moving to much more complex forests with the introduction of thinning and controlled burns. And then scaling again to the Yuba partnership, 275,000 acres of active management. We are just super excited about this work that we're doing with you all. And then, as Henry noted, there is a huge role and a huge gap. We have the state moving the right direction. We have the feds beginning to take critical steps. We have tools in the toolkit, including a memorandum between the Forest Service and the state of California. But we really have to figure out how we more effectively utilize the biomass across the forest to more effectively provide a private sector catalyst that keeps everybody aligned and brings economic vitality and growth to the regions in a way that's really a lot more sustainable. So no one can do this alone. Recognizing that, the Nature Conservancy embarked on a project with Bain Consulting a couple of years ago. We want to share the work on that with you all. So I'm hopeful David will send you some links to that. And we really, the Climate Catalyst Fund that is now under consideration in the state legislature becomes a really important part in incentivizing investment to use small-scale biomass, woody biomass for biofuels, for new wood products, and to really provide a more robust economic picture across the Sierras. And all of this, as you all know at NCWA, and are probably as good at as anybody on the map, all this depends on partnerships, multifaceted partnerships, stakeholders with different interests coming in from different angles to put this together. And we really do need to scale up this work dramatically over the next decade. And the outcome, if we can do that, is going to be higher reliability on safe, clean drinking water, higher reliability to not have regulators worried about water quality, worried about wildlife impacts, worried about loss of habitat, and what that also means for the sustainability, scalability of infrastructure that you all need for delivering water, that we need to do better on with the utilities in terms of delivering energy, and really putting the whole picture together, providing better outcomes for people and for nature, and for all of the NCWA partners out there. Thank you for this opportunity to join you today, and we look forward to rolling up our sleeves and working together on all this as we improve healthy headwater conditions that are really, really critical, both for water supply benefits as well as for nature. So thank you for your commitment to this, your innovation, your hard work. It's great to be partnering with you all in this.
Thanks, Jay. And Andy, you guys were the first. You kind of showed us the way. Why don't you tell us about it?
Sure. Thanks, Brent, and thanks for NCWA for having us. Yeah, unfortunately, we were the first. PCWA, Placer County Water Agency, we're located here. We're a countywide water agency throughout Placer County. But our headwaters for our water supplies for our customers and our hydroelectric operation is really the entirety of the American River watershed that we share with the Sacramento Municipal Utility District and El Dorado Irrigation District. And yeah, we had to be the first. We had one of the most devastating wildfires ever in this watershed in the King Fire in 2014. And after we had the King Fire, my agency, my elected board of directors decided that we were going to try to do something to significantly mitigate the risk of catastrophic wildfire going forward. In 2014, the King Fire burned almost 100,000 acres in our watershed. And burned it really in a way that hadn't occurred before, at least in recent times, and burned it to a point that actually affected our water quality, dramatically impacted our hydroelectric generating facilities. And we wanted to do something about that. And it was really kind of a hard thing to start. Doing partnerships to collaboratively manage federal lands was something that wasn't really a thing back in 2014. And so we needed those partnerships that Jay talked about. And we managed to put together a partnership that really centered around a major municipal reservoir, French Meadows Reservoir, and a partnership that included the conservation community, of course, the Forest Service, the Tahoe National Forest, PCWA, but also the County of Placer, because of their unique position and being able to really drive the actual on the ground work to hire contractors to thin the forest around our reservoir is really a key part of this partnership. And then folks like the American River Conservancy and UC Merced really provided a lot of the services on the surrounding private lands, as well as the research services that we needed to be able to document success and really to test hypotheses in this watershed scale work. But so why a water agency, right? And this goes to something that that David Guy and I have talked about, which is this idea of ridgetop to river mouth for a management, watershed management. And that is to say that what happens in the Sierra Nevada really affects water supplies throughout California. It's not segments, it's not silos, it's an entire picture that starts where snow falls at the very top of the Sierra Nevada mountains and then flows downstream through hydroelectric facilities in many cases, through storage reservoirs, through a flood control system in the Central Valley, and then down to the Delta and out the bay. That's one ecosystem, and what happens in one part affects what happens in another. And so really, as we think about forest management, it's really watershed management, and it's really part of the water management picture in California. I'm reminded that back in 2006, the Association of California Water Agencies did a series of videos with Huell Hauser, who many of us know and love, rest his soul. Huell came up to Placer County and said, what he figured out from that trip was we all live in a watershed. And I think that's really important as we think about what California's water future looks like. And how do we integrate forest management with flood control, with water supply, and with clean hydroelectric generation? That's really what we're trying to do. And so in that vein, in the American River Basin, we're doing a couple of things that sort of try to encapsulate the whole story. We have a concept in the American River Watershed called the Supershed, and it's really trying to connect the beneficiaries of a clean water supply that starts in the headwaters with the folks that use water downstream of our reservoirs, downstream of Folsom Reservoir, and the multiple benefits, right? So it's not just water supply, but as we deal with a warming climate, and we've seen a significant amount of warming in Placer County over the last 70 years or so, up to 3 degrees, which has reduced the number of days of frost, which means that the snowpack already is melting earlier, and the snowpack is not as heavy as it once was. We're trying to mitigate that stuff, but we're also trying to adapt to it. And so some of the work that Henry talked about of optimizing the forests for snowpack, right, to try to retain snow on the ground into the spring and into the early parts of the summer, what that does is it multiplies our reservoir storage space. It's our biggest reservoir is the snowpack. And if that snowpack shrinks, it makes operations for water supply and for flood control much more difficult. And so working with folks like the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency, as well as the Regional Water Authority, what we're doing is demonstrating that we can manage our forested headwaters to try to retain snowpack and to manage runoff in a way that is more controllable for all of those beneficial uses. Let me also say that because we live in a managed ecosystem, we're managing, for flood control, water supply, but also for fisheries health. And the Lower American River is really an ideal situation to test this in. We have a rim dam at Folsom Reservoir that has a lot of tension on it. It's supposed to protect the people of Sacramento from catastrophic floods. We've come close to catastrophically flooding Sacramento on a number of occasions in the last 3 decades. And we think it's going to get worse, that flood risk, if we don't do something about it. And Folsom Reservoir also provides a water supply for not only the people of Sacramento, but they use just a small portion of the throughput, less than 10% of Folsom Reservoir. Most of the water that's developed in this watershed has other uses. It has uses for Bay Delta water quality. It has uses for farms in the Central Valley. And those are all important uses, and we need to maximize the use of Folsom Reservoir. But if our watershed isn't healthy above Folsom Reservoir, it enters the season, the storage season has to enter the season much lower, and then it can't fill as much. And when it can't fill as much, our cold water resources for maintaining our fisheries in the Lower American River really suffer. And so that watershed story, that forest health story, manifests itself for fisheries health, for water supply, and for flood control. And we think we can improve all 3 of those things. But agencies like PCWA, while we're the lead with Placer County on doing this work, this 28,000 acres of work that Jay mentioned, it's really difficult to do that alone. And I think that's why we're really excited about the state and federal partnership, the memorandum of understanding that the governor signed with the federal government last summer in August. But operationalizing that is going to take funding, and it's going to take collaboration and cooperation. Performing 1 million acres of forest treatments every year is a tremendously difficult lift, and it's much more than we're doing currently. And I think that water agencies, I really like the term Henry used, integrators. Water agencies are in a unique position because we live in these watersheds, because we try to manage these watersheds for multiple beneficial uses. We think we can be the cornerstone of a lot of these partnerships. And I know that UBA and PCWA have taken the lead effort in that, and Willie's going to talk more about that. But we think it's going to take water agencies throughout the Sacramento Valley really trying to take a leadership role in putting together partnerships, amalgamating monies, and then actually hiring contractors to do the kind of stewardship work we need to do, whether that's prescribed fire or mechanical thinning. We think we can do that. And we think that if we do this correctly, along with a bunch of other actions in the watersheds, things like spreading water in floodplains, new ways of thinking about flood control, re-envisioning habitat in the Central Valley. We think as part of a package, forest management makes a lot of sense for us to embrace here in the Sacramento Valley. And with that, I'll turn it over to Willie and look forward to his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. That was great. Well, Willie, we watched Placer, and now we're taking it on our own and going bigger. So tell us about what's happening on the Yuba watershed.
Hey, everyone. I'm Willie Whittlesey, General Manager of Yuba Water Agency. We've learned a lot from Henry and Jay and Andy about the importance of our forest resources and our watershed health and how it contributes to our water supply, our water quality and quantity, carbon sequestration, jobs, public safety. And I'm here to talk to you about how we get from, maybe no project proposed or small efforts in your watershed and scale up to the scale that is truly needed to really have an impact or a benefit in California. What you see on the screen here is is an example of, a watershed scale and the impact of wildfire on a watershed scale. And you'll hear about this in a minute from me, but right now, Yuba Water Agency is working with a bunch of others on the North Yuba Forest Partnership. It's a 275,000 acre project, and it encompasses the entire watershed of the North Yuba upstream of our major reservoir, New Bullards Bar. But what it also does is it compares the scale of last year's North Complex wildfire that burned just over a matter of a few weeks in the Feather River watershed. And this is an example of the scale of the fires we're seeing and these devastating, catastrophic fires. And, here we have a watershed that's just 4.5 miles away from what we think, our watershed is a major planning effort, 275,000 acres. And we're really trying to invest in this and plan an effort to treat this area. And then just in a matter of weeks, while we're in our planning process, the adjacent watershed, almost completely burned. So this is I'm just showing this to show you the scale we need to start thinking about. And you've heard from Jay and how they're ramping up from 2,300 acres to 9 million acres over a series of years. And I think we all need to work towards this effort. And I'm here to tell you about the effort the Yuba Water Agency has gone through the past few years to scale up. And it all started with our local fire safe council, just a small entity working on small projects, pretty much rural residential areas, and getting good work done and really kind of building just the local collaboration and local education on what needs to happen. And then one day, Blue Forest Conservation came knocking on our door with a proposal. And this was like a proposal to really collaborate or really partnership with the Forest Service and start treating federal lands. And they had this really unique financing structure, the Forest Resilience Bond. And we struggled with it when they first proposed it. And it's a funding mechanism that gets money invested on the ground for forest treatments quickly, and it kind of cuts out the bureaucracy of waiting for grant reimbursement or the Forest Service budget cycle to go through, or even the state or local entity budget cycles to go through. And we didn't really understand it at first, but we analyzed the benefits of it. We realized that participating in this program would potentially benefit our water quality and quantity. It would also have a science aspect where they would study the increased water quantity that would be coming off of our forests and into our reservoir and downstream into the Sacramento River and the Delta over time by restoring our forests back to their natural condition. And so we justified it. We jumped in and we participated in a proof of concept project. It's a 15,000 acre project where half of the area, the 15,000 acres, is actually treated. And it went well. And I have to compliment our board of directors for making the leap and jumping into this type of a partnership. We were thinking it would catalyze, bigger projects, but we didn't know how fast, and we honestly didn't know if it would be successful. But as we were working through that project and actually getting work done on the ground, we started, looking for all other, funding mechanisms or partners. And the Healthy Forest Grant Program came through CAL FIRE, and we're working on the proof of concept project, and at the same time we're applying for grants for more of the private lands around our communities of Brownsville and Dobbins and Challenge. And we were awarded about a $5.5 million grant from CAL FIRE to go treat those private lands. So kind of my example here is there's no one recipe or no one way to do all this stuff. You just need to work in parallel and partner and collaborate and seek, multiple funding sources, multiple partners, and just see what can happen and move things along. And back to the Yuba project, the proof of concept project, what we found is it was very successful. The Forest Resilience Bond work, it brought together other collaborators. CAL FIRE funded part of it. The Forest Service is a partner and they funded part of it. But what really happened is it got people attracted to what we were doing and the unique funding aspect and the partnerships we were building. And it resulted in what you're seeing here on the screen, the North Yuba Partnership of 275,000 acres, a watershed scale effort. I never thought it would happen that fast. It was just a matter of a couple of years. We're starting to plan on the watershed level, but that's really what we need to start working on is, entire watershed scale projects. So here I'm showing the North Yuba Forest planning project in total. And what you see here is you see the entire Yuba watershed. You see our pilot project in green in the Northeast, and you see a project that we are hopefully going to kick off this summer called the Trapper Project. And what I want to explain here is it takes a patchwork of projects, and there's not a perfect plan to get this done. We started on the North Yuba project in 2019, and now in 2021 we're going to be starting on the Trapper Project. And it was a project that was in planning with the Forest Service, and it was sitting on the shelf. And now that we're gaining momentum with all of these partners, here we are now implementing it on a larger scale. And we're also going through a planning effort to treat the entire watershed you see here shaded in yellow. The key here is our initial proof of concept project has spawned this partnership with all the entities you see on the right of the screen here to develop this watershed level planning effort. It has taken some time to get the planning effort underway, sign a memorandum of understanding, and really identify the objectives and what are the strategic areas we're going to treat, and how are we going to get through regulations and some of the other troubles that Henry and Andy talked about. How are we going to train our workforce? How are we going to get enough people to work on these projects? Where is the biomass material going to go? Where are the saw logs going to go? But the reality is it's underway. And I want to just touch on the fact that there is no perfect recipe on how to get this done. The bottom line is we need to start somewhere, and it's okay to start small. We need to build collaboration, and we need to have an open mind on how we get this done. And there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to treat this watershed in the 20-year planning horizon that we have identified. But we're working towards it, and we're building momentum, and we're moving forward. And that's really the key here is working on a large scale, working in partnerships and collaborations, having an open mind. And remember, to get this done, it's going to take time, but we need to start somewhere, and we need to take bold action. That's all I have. I'm going to turn it back over to Brent for questions and answers.
Thanks, Willie. Yeah, we've got a few questions, but actually I wanted to ask one. I think that one of the things that I find most interesting about headwater management and forest management is sometimes it teaches us to love our enemies. And you've had to build partnerships with sometimes with people or organizations that your board may have fought with in the past. How has it been that you've been able to build these big partnerships? And do you think that it's the bigger the forest management, the bigger the acreage, the more partners you have to work in? And so anybody want to work on that?
I think it's not necessarily bigger regions mean more partners. It is, I think Willie described that really well. It's a situation response. You've got to take what is the risk factors, these fire safe councils, and ensuring that they're integrated so that we're working back from communities to protect them. I think it's a diverse kind of set of partnerships that are matched to meet the needs of the region. And I think one thing you've heard from all of us is that we really have to rapidly scale up the level of commitment to get this done in the next decade, and to recognize it's not done doesn't mean you're actually good. You have to keep that pace going. But I think that setting the right goals, let's get out, let's make sure that we're treating 1 million acres of forest land on the landscape each year for the next decade. We've seen a lot of momentum going that way. And now it's how do we keep building on these partnerships? The all lands approach, where feds are working on state lands, the state is working on federal lands, and we're using innovative new tools like the forest resilience bonds. It's going to be it's a formula that is going to be unique, and I think Willie described that really well. That it's just matching up different kinds of people assets, different kinds of funding assets, and making making the situation fit the interests and needs on the ground.
So Brent, that's a good question. And I have a simple answer, and that is that when you're facing an existential threat, you jump in the foxhole with whoever's around. And
Thanks,
really
Jay.
that's what this is.
Andy, did you start to say something?
Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Did I lose you guys?
Brent may have lost us. Let me start over. So Brent, I have a simple answer on that, and that is that when you're facing an existential threat, you jump in the foxhole with whoever's willing to jump in with you.
That's great.
And I think that's what we're seeing. It's a two-pronged threat, right? We've got this sort of rapidly warming climate, and that's driving wildfires that the conservation community, for instance, would, at one time we had sort of, I think, petty disagreements sometimes about, things like spotted owls. But then it turns out that if you burn 4.5 million acres of forest land in California, you've got a real spotted owl problem, right? And so we've found alignments in places that we perhaps haven't had them in the past. And now that's allowing us to do not only the work, but also the research work. And look, this isn't a thing that we've got 100% solved. We're learning as we go. We're testing hypotheses. We don't know that we have the perfect solution right now. But I think the key thing when you're facing a problem of this size is you've got to start. Once you start, then you can learn. And once you learn, then you can scale up. And that's kind of where we are, is that learning to scaling up moment, in my view. And it's getting people interested, and more people are becoming interested, and those alliances are changing. And so I think it's more than just the value of the work on the ground, is the value of the partnerships that stretch not only from the Headwaters, but now they're stretching into other part of the California's water picture, I think.
Hey, Brent, I'd like to chime in if I can. I am a professional forester. How I got in the water world, I don't really know, but I've been doing this forestry stuff for 25 years or so. And, back when I started, there was a lot of contention about just harvesting trees and really cutting any trees in the forest. And I think society and culture has changed over the years, and these mega fires are really, driving people's cultural decisions. But the reality is it's more accepted now to remove trees from the forest. And we all have a common interest here. And it's really, it's easier to align ourselves with those that we may have been in opposition with in the past on common interests like watershed health, and forest management. So while we may have been in opposition in the past, we're finding this common ground on forest health. And you know what? That really is actually helping us find common ground in other areas we're dealing with, whether it's, fisheries habitats or delta issues. It's really kind of bringing us all together. It's getting the good out of the bad in these mega fires.
Hey, Brent, can I add to that, if I may?
Absolutely.
Sure. I just wanted to focus really on the Forest Service for a moment and partnerships with the Forest Service. So this is a landowner, right? And the estimates are around 2/3 of these mixed conifer forests up in the Sierra are owned by federal agencies. Most of it is the Forest Service, and the agency itself over the last couple of years has been really plagued in many ways by borrowing resources from proactive forest management, technical resources, administrative resources, and financial resources, and pulling them into the fire suppression effort, which has just been growing each year and growing more severe. And so really what these partnerships do is they help to fill those gaps in capacity using the talents and resources of external partners. And the Forest Service is moving towards and has moved towards setting themselves up for doing these partnerships effectively and leveraging outside resources. There's more work to be done there, but that's just a little overview of sort of the Forest Service perspective and how important it is to partner with those folks.
Thank you. So there are a lot of tributaries in the North and Central Sierras, and they're all flowing down as we're moving water. How are we going to, when we're looking at a group here, is that we're mostly in the upper watersheds. We actually have some forest within our districts. And how are we going to bring in the downstream users as part of this program and to help them to get excited about headwaters and forest management?
Yeah, it's a great question, Brent. And I think that, one of the foundational principles that we hope to rely on going forward to get to the kinds of acreages that Jay mentioned is we're trying to get away from, I think, the boom and bust cycles of doing statewide ballot propositions that borrow money and you get one slug of money and it might last you for 5 to 6 years and then you're out of money again and trying to get another bond passed in the state. We just don't think that works. I mean, we think it works for some infrastructure, but we don't think it works for this ongoing need. And so, yeah, we're trying to, build a business plan here in the American River Basin that really looks to the 2.5 million people that are in and around the Sacramento region, and really addresses their needs for. I mean, let's be honest. One of the biggest drivers of the interest in forest management lately is smoke. Right, smoke in August, September, October, and now lately into November. As a health concern, and really that's what's gotten people's attention, and it's unfortunate that it's taken that. But really, can we figure out a funding strategy here locally for the beneficiaries of this watershed? People, these are the places that people go to visit all summer. They have cabins, they go camping, they go hiking. They understand the value of these watersheds, we hope. Can we get them to invest in it in a long-term way? And if you put enough people and customers in a place where they're able to fund and you may start in a voluntary way, fund these efforts. It actually, you don't need much from every customer, every water customer, every electric customer on a monthly basis. If it all goes into a pot that funds these kinds of things, we think it can work. We're not there yet, but it's something that we're definitely exploring so that we have a constant stream of funding to be able to scale up to the kinds of places that Jay wants to go. And it's a hard thing. It's a hard conversation to have, but we're on the front end of it. And we think we can grow that conversation in the coming years.
Great.
Yeah. If I may, Andy, I think you really nailed it there. I mean, it is this air quality crisis with air quality conditions in the Bay Area and Sacramento, and then now even down in Los Angeles in this past year, being among the worst in the world for days at a time. And it's really raised consciousness across the state that this is a bigger issue than just the back 40 trees burning. And I do think Andy's got it right. There's a role for the federal government to do more. There's a role for the state to do more. We really like this governor's proposal that identifies general fund money for the first time to do as an active forest management, that identifies greenhouse gas reduction funding for an ongoing contribution, as well as bond money. But we can't afford to put all the eggs in one basket. It's got to be a diversified approach. We need more federal buy-in for sure. We need to get the governor's budget approved this year, and we need to figure out ways to catalyze that investment of the private sector. It's hugely important in this. And this catalyst fund that the governor has in the budget is a really important step to do that. And I think hearing from you all that we got to get this done this year to then get to next year and the next 10 years. And but I really think Andy and Will have captured it. Andy and Willie really captured this well about the need to really tailor the partnerships in the right ways that meet the local conditions and interests, and we work up from there with everybody buying into the solutions.
Hey Brent, I'll chime in and say, the folks on the Zoom here or the presentation here, we've started the process of attracting others' interests in what we're doing. We have projects that are happening on the ground. We can show our efforts are growing and building, and there's going to be federal funds, hopefully. There's going to be state funds, hopefully. But the reality is now we need to get our stories out, and more than just what we're doing today, get it out to the water community. We need to get it out to the public, and we need to have some of the media outlets that are racing to the fires and really reporting on the fires. We need to track them to our projects in the field and show them the forest that's untreated and the forest that is treated, right? And these are places they go, like Andy mentioned, up the Interstate 80 corridor to go to Tahoe, or up the 50 corridor. I mean, we have projects, or our partners have projects in these areas, and we just need to get it out there that this is the work that needs to be done. And it's starting and it's building and there's momentum, and it's really about educating, just the general public about it. But the point is we have good projects to showcase.
So as water agencies, we move water where it needs to go. But one of the things that in headwater management is there are going to be a lot of jobs up in our regions, up in areas that haven't had a lot of new jobs. So how do you guys see yourselves working as economic development directors and trying to get those companies in place? Because it's going to take a monumental job to get the companies that used to be there and the mills that we used to have. How are we as the water agencies trying to get this watershed development working? How are we going to contact the people who are going to have to do the projects and to figure out how to use the wood products to a beneficial use?
Well, I think, Brent, the biggest impediment that when I've talked to the industry folks, and obviously we got folks under contract, that are working on our watersheds all summer long. When I talk to them, when I talk to folks like Sierra Pacific Industries, the number one impediment to investment is lack of certainty, right? And this is, again, we're in this building stage, right? But things like long-term master stewardship agreements that can guarantee a supply of either biomass or logs or fuel wood or whatever the product may be that these investors are looking for. You've got to have some certainty around that. Without it doesn't make any sense to make an investment, right? Because these are capital intensive operations, right? Even things like harvesters and chippers, these are expensive pieces of equipment. And, the local folks, can't afford that unless they can amortize it over a payback period that makes sense. And so what we're trying to do here really is put together not only like the French Meadows project, but what's the next project look like? What's the one after that? Because the planning horizon, right? It takes a little bit of time to get through the planning and the environmental work on these things. And the more that our Forest Service partners, and I think they're doing a fabulous job at this, are looking, to these larger scale projects and doing larger scale environmental documents that we can fit these smaller projects under, it makes it so much easier to be able to tell a contractor, look, I've got 10 years worth of projects. You need to buy that piece of equipment. And, for the larger things like biomass facilities and sawmills, which we desperately need. I mean, we are desperate for those things. And it's unfortunate. Willie, you showed a map of what happened in the North Complex. A lot of that ground was private ground. A lot of those logs are going to be headed to the Lincoln log mill and to Oroville this summer. And that, SPI needs to get those logs milled because they're their logs, and that forces their hand. They can't take logs from places like the French Meadows project, right? There's simply not enough places right now to take, sort of low value timber or even high value timber in the Sierra. And it's really going to stifle us if we can't figure out this part of it.
Hey, Brent, I'd like to add that we need to make a rule in this presentation that you call on people and Andy doesn't just get to go first and answer all the questions accurately and specifically and in all the detail. I have all this stuff to say, but Andy says it all, but he's got it right. I mean, the first thing Andy talked about was boom and bust. We got to get out of the typical, timber sale. That's a two or 3 year timber sale, and you harvest, 1,000 acres and then you move on. And we really can do that by looking at the scale we're now talking about, looking at watershed scale and having these master stewardship agreements that are 20 years long, where an investor could come in and say, yes, I could build a biomass facility or a sawmill or some other facility and actually have it be financially viable over a 20-year period. I can't do that with a 2-year timber sale, right? So we're getting there. And, thanks, Andy, for stealing the thunder.
Well, I think we have reached our time. You guys did a tremendous job. I just want to thank you. NCWA really appreciates your leadership, and I can tell you the state of California appreciates it as we are leading the state and the nation in headwaters management and forest management. And so thank you all, and we'll see you at the rest of the conference.